Good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Brenner, VP of Content Strategy here at Security Weekly and Cyber Risk Alliance, and hope you're all enjoying this final day of RSA. Um, I am delighted to be here with an old friend, Branden Williams, VP of IAM Strategy at Ping Identity. So, welcome. Good to
Thank you.
see you.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, how's it going for you this week so far? Talk about, what are your customers telling you? What are your, in terms of insights?
Yeah. So I think, you kicked it off by this is the last day.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting here a little bit self-conscious because I've got these casual shoes on because it's the only way your last day you can make it through, right?
That's true.
Walking through the floor, done with the dress shoes. So I would say it's been a real blessing to see everybody again in person and be able
Hmm.
to have meetings in a place where, the people that you want to talk to are you're connected with, right? I'm looking forward to walking the show. I've only sort of been through a couple times. So I'm curious to see some of the big problems that we're continuing to see. How are people solving them? Are they still solvable? Or is it still the kind of the buzzword bingo that we sometimes see in some of the places down there? But I'm looking forward to having a few meaningful conversations down there.
And you've just set it up perfectly because my question is was was inevitably going to go towards the world according to Brandon.
Sure.
As you walk around and doing what Ping does. What are the insights that you hear people talking about or that you think people should be talking about and maybe you're not
Yeah.
when it comes to, the way the attack surface keeps growing, where companies are falling short when it comes to identity access management, what direction they need to be taking in
Yeah.
your view?
So I would say that there's a few themes that I've heard. Um, one of them really is focused on this concept of passwordless, which is almost becoming a buzzword in this case. And internally, we've sort of separated it out as passwordless and password fewer, right?
Hmm.
So password fewer is let's get SSO set up so that when you log in once, now you're logging into these Workday and other systems without entering a password. Password fewer. Password less is I don't want to use a password anymore. I want to use some other form of identification authorization. So when we're talking to customers, the first thing that we sort of say is like, look, whether you're looking at your customer identity passwordless or your internal stuff, you still have to kind of roll out some level of multi-factor strategy first,
Hmm.
because typically what you're going to do is replace passwords with one of those factors. So you want it to be, resistant to phishing, you want it to be strong, all those types of things. I think another key challenge, and this is from my experience working at the bank in my last job, having a single source of identity is really difficult in a homogeneous environment, right? So, like if you're a 100% Microsoft shop and that's all you do is Microsoft, that's probably going to be pretty easy. But
Hmm.
that's kind of not the reality of workforce, and it's definitely not the reality of customer. Customer tends to have multiple systems spread across multiple places, but you still have to have a single source of identity to assert that all the way through and all the way across. And it becomes increasingly difficult when you go digital first, which we kind of are all forced to do,
Yep.
and then creates this sort of like this shift, right? So I was kind of thinking about some of the questions and thinking about the experience that we had a couple of years ago, and I think that people, workforce people specifically, were willing to put up with a certain level of sort of hassle if we can get up from our desk and walk down the hall to talk to John in IT to say, can you fix this problem for me? But when you're not able to do that and you're in a queue or a chat queue or a ticket that you have to submit that goes into a black hole, or a phone number that you can't really figure out anybody's going to answer, then it's sort of like, well, we need to really rethink this digital experience and how we're handling not only customer but workforce, and not just identity but in general, but it generally starts with identity.
Hmm. So, a lot of vendors on the floor that are selling identity and access management are selling zero trust.
Mm-hmm.
So, talk about what Ping is doing these days, really, to stand apart um, from a lot of the other vendors? Because, you come here and it's really hard to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what is the company messaging right now in terms of, you've just talked about the trends and, where you think we should be focusing,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of how Ping does things, talk a bit about that.
Okay. So we are really focused on the experience. And that's the, soup to nuts experience of somebody from a workforce perspective or a customer perspective and how they interact with digital properties. So we have a zero trust conversation, but even internally, we sort of talk about it. It's like, look, zero trust isn't a product, right? It's sort of an architecture and mindset, and
Yeah.
it's a way to go about thinking about how do I manage this device that I can't see and I can't put my finger on, but somebody's going to do something that requires some level of privilege to do, right?
Yeah.
So for us, it's more experiential, and how do I do that in a way where I'm not dumping a bunch of stuff into code, because that's when it becomes really problematic and stale and almost concrete and rebar versus something that I can just swap around. So we're doing like things internally where we're starting to look at experiential login flows or even other just types of access flows where we say, look, for this particular asset, we're going to run a series of, like, we're going to do a fraud and risk score and see, have we seen this device before? Is it something we're comfortable doing? What's the context of what this person is trying to do? Is it something we think they're authorized to do? Yes or no? And then sort of roll it down the way until we get to a decision, which could be multifaceted, right? It could be add more friction, step up authentication, or it could be just let them through, or it could be block it all entirely, or alert, or something like that, right? But going sort of left to right and doing it in a way where we're not coding a bunch of things, but we're doing it in sort of a drag and drop configuration orchestration tool. It's their tool called DaVinci. This is where it allows us to do rapid iteration. We can do like A/B testing if we want to see which flow works better, much more on the customer side than the workforce side, right? Which flow makes more sense for a customer to interact with.
Yeah.
But that's really how we're trying to set ourselves apart, is we want to put the power of the decision making back into the hands of the people orchestrating these things and building these flows. And it doesn't make sense to try to limit what they can connect to and then force everybody into a coding scenario. Like, let's up level a little bit, abstract it, and do as much low code, no code as we can. Drag and drop, visualize it. Why do we need a developer to do that when we could have a policymaker do it? Or even just a front end designer do stuff like that. So we're trying to set ourselves apart by focusing 100% on that user experience and rapid iteration and designing it.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the future, because you and I, we were on a call just last week,
Mm-hmm.
and you brought up, the future of personal identity. So talk about, here's an individual. What does that look like for
Mm-hmm.
them? Or what are you hoping it looks like 5 years from now?
Yeah. So what we see and what we're helping to drive through standards bodies that we're participating in is that you're going to move from this centralized grouping of authentication areas or identity credential stores to, we're going to put the power of identity back into the user's hand. And that could be something, a concept of, say, an identity wallet, if you want to put it that way, that would be sitting on your phone. Now that we have compute going that far, it makes it a little bit easier to do things like document verification, and then storing a verified document digitally, the record of that document. And then when I want to use that document, I provide a selfie that's sitting right there to verify that, yes, this is the same one that I'm authorized to use. And then that authorization gets transmitted in. So, when you talk about things like consent and how my identity is used, obviously in banking, like, there's certain rules. We couldn't erase you. We had to keep records of transactions for a period of time for government regulation reasons, right? But having the ability to sort of create that consent in and put that back in the hands of you and I as users, and being able to present and assert an identity as we sort of qualify and put it together, then the other side of that can make the decision: do I want to accept this or not, right? So in some cases, a passport is sufficient. In some cases, maybe it's not. So if I've loaded in my passport, I've verified it, we verified it's a valid passport, submit it to the provider, and they're cool with all that, That's great. So, like a real world example of where we're experimenting with how we could do this is for password resets, right? So, password reset where I can't see the person, this would be like for workforce, right? There's a certain level of verification that we try to do over the phone. But there could be some challenges with that. Like, if somebody's good at social engineering or there's enough right circumstances, maybe I could force a bad situation to happen. And what if instead, once your workers are onboarded, they have their I-9, they've already done their document verification, we've got that stored in their credential wallet, they want to reset their password, they would then open the app and say, okay, reset password, take the selfie. Yes, this is the same document that was presented. I know it's the same worker because I've already onboarded them as a worker. Let's go ahead and now set that reset flow in play, which could be, a number of different things from a security perspective, but at least kicks that off where we have better verification of who's on the other side of that connection.
So I threw out there, I said 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
How long do you think before we're actually there?
So, you know that I spent a lot of my time in the payment space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge that we have here is the same as you have there. It all comes down to acceptance, right? So you can't fundamentally disrupt a payment system if the merchant and the buyer don't participate in the same mechanism to exchange funds. They don't accept that same transfer. So I have a feeling that some of the credential stores will start to shift that way sooner rather than later. But if we're talking about 100% being able to use that, we're always going to have folks that resist change to technology or are uncomfortable with the privacy implications of doing something like that. So I don't think we can say we're going to be uniformly one way anyway, but I can tell you that we're using this technology today to do verification. A great example of that would be automating online account opening for a bank. So those documents, government documents, have to be validated. Well, now we're doing that with a credential wallet so that you don't have to have a person on the other side. We verify it and it's good to go, right? So 5 years, I mean, who knows? A lot can happen in 5 years. Go back 5 years and look at what's changed. It's been quite a bit, right? So optimistically, I think we could see some good adoption. We really want to see good adoption because we think that it's going to be driven by people demanding to retain or regain control over those identities and then being able to assert and make friction lower when I'm trying to interact with new people. Like, I'm already a verified person. I've got all this documentation to show that. Let me just send this to you so that you can accept it and move on.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully we're sitting here a year from now. Well, I don't know if RSA is going back to February next year.
Well, we could pick any number of
April,
years.
I think.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll have to revisit this conversation
Absolutely.
in a year and see how we're doing. But we're up on our time, but I would invite everybody to stay tuned because we will have more broadcasting as the day commences.